Well, we're going to get started here. The Coffee with Community Services. Today is March 18th, and we have some special stuff going on today with Coffee with Community Services. Looks like we've got 52 folks online already, and I'll kind of just go through real quickly. I see we've got some of our ACRC staff. We've got Denise Hopkins and Gino Nessie and Cindy Lay, and we've got Marty over there, another one of our community services staff, and the community services manager, Olivia, who is here. And we've got Carol Wilhelm, the client services manager overseeing our SLS and deaf services. We've got Gary here as well, another one of our community services specialists, and Scott, one of our other newer community services specialists. After 18 days, you're already a veteran of the regional centers, I feel like. And then Kelsey Rainey, another one of our community services specialists, and Jason as well, who many of you work with. And then my assistant, Zach, is here. So I will now introduce Jennifer Bloom, who is going to give you guys a little bit of an idea about what we're going to be going over today. And then she's got a staff person, I believe, to introduce as well, kind of to get us started. So welcome, everyone. We are going to have a special discussion about independent facilitators today. And so I'm going to throw it over to Associate Client Services Director Jennifer Bloom, who's going to get us rocking and rolling.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. You might remember we had our Self-Determination Advisory Committee ad hoc group provide some trainings, some training sessions for providers to learn a little bit about SDP. As a result of that, we did a little survey, and we learned from the survey results that all of you would prefer some more in-depth information about financial management services and independent facilitators. We have completed the financial management services piece of our training, and today's training is going to be focused on more information around independent facilitators, the role of the independent facilitator. And we do have two independent facilitators with us today. We have Rachel Palmer from Progressive Employment Concepts. There she is. Hi, Rachel. And we also have Rosie Laska. I think I just saw her name on there. Rosie, are you here? Okay, I see you wave. Yep. Hi. Okay, so before we dive into that, I just wanted to quickly introduce Jacob Miller. Jacob is our new client advocate. He has joined our client advocate team with David Lopez, not in replacement of, but expanding. We are expanding our client advocate team because we have a lot of clients. And we're really happy to have Jacob here with us. He started on March 1st. He's been in a multitude of meetings already, and he's been making the rounds. So I want to turn it over to Jacob just to say a little quick hello, and then we'll dive into our presentation.
Hello, everybody. I have the grid format on, so I see about like 25 people. So I feel like very Hollywood Squares right now. Hope everybody is doing good. Happy to be here, and I look forward to working with everybody, at least at some point.
Thank you, Jacob. We're happy you're here. I also wanted to say that maybe around 11:30 we might have Benita Denise Shaw, excuse me. She might be here a little bit later to talk about her experience as a volunteer independent facilitator and as a parent. So I think we'll just go ahead and get started, and this will just be like a discussion between Rachel and Rosie. We have some questions, and we've already gone over this with them, so we're ready to dive in. I'll turn it over to one of you, whichever is ready.
Maybe I can start and just introduce myself. I know a lot of us have met before, but my name is Rachel Palmer. I'm an independent facilitator at Progressive Employment Concepts. I wear some other hats too, but for the last 2 years, that's really been my focus, is supporting people to join self-determination and helping train other people so that they can do the same. So that's who I am, and that's kind of why I'm here to talk to you. Rosie, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and let people know your background.
Rosie, I think you're muted.
Okay, now there it goes. Sorry, guys, I couldn't
Oh,
figure it out. It wasn't
that's
letting me
okay.
unmute.
You sound great now.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosie Laska. I'm with the Autism Society of Los Angeles. I am an independent facilitator trainer, and I have a couple years doing self-determination and training on the process and dealing with regional centers, vendors, and everybody. So I'm happy to be here.
Very good. Welcome. Welcome to both of you. So one of the first questions we wanted to ask was just to give our group an idea about how many Alta California Regional Center participants are you working with right now as an independent facilitator?
So I'm actively supporting 3 people right now in self-determination. It's more than that, but they've kind of moved on to other things. And just as a note, our agency, Progressive, I think we're currently supporting about 25 people in the self-determination program, either as independent facilitators or providing direct services to people.
Great. And Rosie?
Well, I'm actually an independent facilitator trainer, so I train independent facilitators. And so I have I think we have about 15 in my current program. I have 15 independent facilitators who speak multiple languages in the Alta catchment area, and also some independent facilitators that are not specifically in the catchment area, such as Sue Lee, who's here, who do support families in the Alta Regional Center.
Great, thank you. We were also curious, just what is the lead time to begin working with a new SDP participant? What does that look like in terms of preparation?
When I was looking at that question, that's a tough one. Our lead time, unfortunately, as an agency has been pretty long. We've had a wait list now for quite some time. For most folks, when they reach out to us and let us know, I want support, will you be my independent facilitator? Most people have been having to wait between 6 months to a year. And it's really just because of our capacity to serve people, right? SDP is new, we're working on onboarding new IFs. So that wait time has been long for folks. But the good news is in the last, 2 months, we have 3 new IFs join our team. So now the wait time for folks, if they're coming to Progressive for IF services, is, I would say, 3 months. And that's slowly dwindling. But I do think, just as a word of, just so that you all know, for individuals looking for experience, independent facilitators, there often is a wait list, just because it's, there's a lot of support that goes into helping them transition to SDP. So folks may find that there are wait lists for some IFs out there.
Yeah. So that's the purpose of my role, is to train more independent facilitators in the catchment area so that we can decrease those wait times. But it is taking quite a bit. I myself have a wait list when I was doing independent facilitation. And I know that most of my students also have that wait time. And so just be aware of that. But it does, once you get going, it can take somewhere between 3 months to 6 months from beginning to end.
Okay, thank you. And so one of the things that comes up, a question around independent facilitation is, does the IF, we'll just say IF, I'll just let the group know we're going to use that acronym throughout. Does the IF provide or develop a person-centered plan for the SDP participant?
So I can tell you that for myself as an independent facilitator, yes, absolutely. That is the foundation of self-determination. So I highly recommend to every individual looking to join SDP that they should have an independent facilitator who can support them to do that. However, I do know that there are some independent facilitators out there that don't offer that type of support. Maybe they only offer support to people once they're in SDP. Maybe they'll help with a budget and a spending plan, but they don't feel maybe qualified to do the person-centered plan. So for myself, I always do that, but I know some IFs out there might not. So it's always good to ask all of those questions.
Right. Yeah, I agree. The independent facilitator in most cases are trained to do spending plans. Some may just not have the experience enough to know how to fully develop it. But for the most part, it should be the role of the independent facilitator to, when they're helping someone transition on the 0 to 4, it should be that they do the person-centered plan, help with identifying unmet needs, and then do the spending plan. And I think it's very important that the family and the participant know what they're getting into and what they're agreeing to for that 2,500 on the 0 to 4. Whether or not the independent facilitator is going to do the spending plan, so that those fundings can be allocated correctly to the person who is going to do the person-centered plan. And then if they're going to collaborate with a more experienced independent facilitator, that they are going to be doing the spending plan. That way there is those funds available for both parties who are supporting them. But I think in most cases at this point, a lot of independent facilitators are getting more familiar with how to do a spending plan. Yeah, and we do train on that as well. So. And Suli, are you there? Maybe Suli can share a
Yes,
little
I
bit
just
more
saw
on
a
that.
note from Suli. Welcome, Suli. I'm sorry I didn't
Hi.
have your name ahead of time. Welcome.
That's fine. Hi, my name is Sue, and I'm actually a current project scientist at the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment. And I'm serving as an IF through my consulting company. And I have several clients at Alta.
Oh my gosh, fantastic. Thank you so much for coming. So feel free to chime on in. We're just we have some basic questions, and then I know we'll take questions from providers as well at the end. I wanted to touch on something you said, Rosa. You mentioned the $2,500 and you mentioned 024. So I just want to put a little context to that for those who may not be aware. The Department of Developmental Services has allocated $2,500 to develop the initial person-centered plan and independent facilitation services. So that is often done through a service code 024 reimbursement or means of funding. So that $2,500 is available to any SDP participant who chooses to use an independent facilitator and to develop a person-centered plan. And that is the funding. It's not part of their budget. It's something that's available to all participants. It doesn't come out of their budget. It's not part of their spending plan. It's meant to help develop this very important plan that really drives the services in self-determination program. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. Some of our, some people who provide independent facilitation or person-centered planning services are already vendored with the regional center. And if they are, we do purchases that way. But if they're not, we have the capacity to fund under 024. So what would you say, Rosie and Sue, maybe you could, Rachel, how does the IF work with providers when estimating a spending plan?
So I would say usually it does fall under the family's responsibility. Usually families come in with an idea of who they want to work with in the community. But since I mainly work with non-English speaking families, I sometimes have to intervene and try to negotiate prices or get pricing from vendors. So in that way, I might interact with the service providers. But it's possible that families, the service providers will not directly interact with IFs because the family would be facilitating that interaction usually.
Right. We don't, as independent facilitators, we don't select the providers. We work as a middleman to just kind of like communication or find out final rates, total fees, that kind of stuff. But it is definitely up to the participant and the family to search and find the providers. We don't usually also don't refer them to a specific provider because that can be a conflict for us, as independent facilitators. So we just work as a middleman. Rachel? Do you have any feedback?
Yes to everything that they said. Yep, completely agree, right? It's supporting the individual to identify those resources, the services, the supports that they're going to need, and just helping people make those connections, right? So for some folks, they will go ahead and reach out to you as a provider on their own, or maybe with their family. I have some people who might ask me to do it in partnership with them. So maybe we sit down for a meeting together with a provider. But I do think independent facilitators can be a good resource where, as a provider, if you're confused about how something works, like what is this FMS thing? How do I get paid? I need help with this paperwork. An independent facilitator can oftentimes support you through that. Yep,
That's
Right.
perfect. That leads
Oh,
us to our,
I'm
oh,
gonna
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Oh,
Sue.
sorry. I'm gonna add to what Rachel just said. Because IFs can support the families and service providers, if you are a community vendor, then maybe it's a good idea to ask the family if they have an IF that they're working with, and ask them if IF could be included in the communication between the family and the FMS and the service providers. That way you can have everyone on the same page.
Thank you for mentioning that, Sue. That collaboration is really important, and that leads us really to our next question. Our topic is really around, what does the independent facilitator need from the providers to complete the SDP steps? So what's good for our providers to know when working with you?
Oh, there's going to be a lot of paperwork sent from the FMS, not from us, but from the FMS. And we might step in sometimes just to give reminders to service providers, or if we have a proactive family, then the family might take on the responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the main thing for providers is to understand the FMS process. So we, as independent facilitators, we don't necessarily have paperwork to provide to the vendor. We don't do that kind of what would it be, agreement or setup. So the main thing is just connecting the provider. Hey, this is the FMS agency. This is their phone number. This is their information. Sometimes we have the package as well, so we can send the package ahead of time and be like, this is what you're going to need. So you're going to have to connect with them and complete that process. And we follow up to make sure that it's being done on both ends from the provider. And so again, just that middleman kind of making sure that everything gets done on a timely manner.
And I agree with all of that, right? Just the support with reviewing the documents from the FMS, making sure, everyone has submitted what they need to, right? Helping to facilitate that. I also know something that will come up for providers in the traditional system. ALTA has an HCBS compliance form for self-determination that you as, vendors in the traditional system would probably be familiar with, but that's something that, you would most likely need to be completing. That's something that you could you can expect to, along with those FMS forms and kind of documentation, is just that HCBS compliance statement. And then of course, right, if you're working with an individual, you're probably going to have some sort of written agreement or contract with them, right? So that's another piece that an independent facilitator may help with. But right, you're negotiating with the individual what the service is going to be, right? What your rate is, how many hours of support that person is requesting, who they want to have supporting them at your agency. Yep.
Yeah, and I just want to add, when talking about these fees and rates that we want to inquire about and set up ahead of time for the spending plan, it's important that we know all of the fees. If there's going to be a late fee, because sometimes the FMS doesn't pay on the date that it's supposed to be. So for instance, if you're as a provider, you need payment by the 3rd and FMSs don't pay till the 15th, is there going to be a late fee? We need to know that ahead of time as independent facilitators so that we account for that in the spending plan. Also, any setup fees, application fees, that kind of stuff, all needs to be brought up front so that we can make sure that it is included in the spending plan. Because if we miss those fees, the spending plan could be short later, and then they will not have those funds to pay for your additional fees that you may have.
Thank you. I want to read a note in the chat from Eric. He said that he has found providers are being asked to sign documents and submit rates for SDP clients without additional information on the person-centered plan or other information on how the clients want to use services. It's assumed they want exactly the same services as traditional by the FMS, which often isn't correct once the family starts services. Thanks, Eric, for putting that in the chat. And then Andrea has piggybacked to say that she's had that experience as well. So any advice on that area?
It also happened to me.
Okay.
Yeah, we had, back in, I think it was November or December, we had an individual who uses our services in the traditional system make the switch to self-determination, and they were supported by an independent facilitator who we didn't know, right? It was kind of outside of us because that was not our role, in the transition. And we started just getting paperwork from the FMS and we were asked to sign contracts, we're like, wait a minute, like we don't even know what this person wants, because there hadn't been that communication and conversation. So I think as a provider, if you're
Oops, Rachel froze there.
I could
Rosie or
add.
Sue, do you want to? Yes,
Yeah,
please.
I would love to add to that because that is one key point that I wanted to make too, is that it's important that when you make this new agreement of self-determination, you're now contracting directly to the family. So it's not a regional center contract, it's a contract directly to the participant and the family. And so in that contract, in that agreement, whatever you want to call it, make sure that you're very detailed on the services that you're going to be providing from top to bottom, and that that's already agreed upon, because self-determination looks different. And so we may want to use vendors similar services that they were already bringing, but when it comes to self-determination, we may want more individualized services that fit their goals and dreams, because in the person-centered plan we come up with goals, we come up with dreams, and they may look just slightly different than when you're already doing. For example, if you're doing independent living skills, something in the past may not have been that he wanted to learn how to cook, but now they want to learn how to cook. So there might be something different in the new services that you're going to be providing. So just don't assume, like, we don't want to assume that it's going to be the same exact apples to apples. We want to really talk to the family, look at that person-centered plan. If they're willing to share it with you guys, look at the person-centered plan. See how you fit into that, those goals and dreams. Where are you coming in to provide the services? Again, just be very detailed in that agreement that this is what we're doing, so that there is no miscommunication on what type of services. And because it could be the case that you're thinking ABC and then it ends up being A through F, and so now you're providing a lot more services. There might be additional fees or higher fees or more hours that are not accounted for on the budget, nor are they accounted for in the spending plan. So we want to make sure that there is no shortage in funding, first of all, and second of all, that everyone understands exactly what your role is going to be.
Eric and Andrea, do you have any other questions around that?
Well, I just want to say that this is something that I think we focus on as far as the implementation, because there's an expectation when we get these from the FMS, just document and provide your rate. And the only rate I have is for my traditional vendored service. And I'm assuming the client is in SDP because they want something in addition to that. So I've yet to be sent the person-centered plan prior to signing contracts. I've only ever seen it after they've started in the process. And so that means the rate and the only service I can quote them is a traditional service. The other problem is that they've already been provided a budget by Alta or other folks. So they say, no, this is what you should charge me. And I've had to explain folks on several times, in some cases, that's not even true. But there's this expectation to fit within the budget that then we're going to do all this for this amount of money. And last thing I want to do is stop somebody from starting the process. So what I end up doing is just signing some contract, but trying to tell them, this may not even work once you get started. And then we have to reevaluate that at some later point to try to get them set up. And so those are just some of the challenges that we face as a provider. And of course, then providing services to somebody who's customizing services on the fly is actually very difficult. And that's something that we need to figure out as an agency. But there's this, the process of even communicating the person-centered plan to the provider is not part of that process, which then, it just there are things there that I think I keep thinking to myself, how do we improve that process?
Yes.
And really, how do you set up the provider and the participant for success? And that's what I'm trying to think through. I'm doing one right now before the call, and I'm filling out that paperwork going, well, we'll see what happens. And the goal is just to get them started. So I just wanted to share that from the provider's perspective, because I don't know where the fix will come, but there will need to be one for SDP to be successful.
Right.
In my opinion.
I would like to chime in on that, because I see that becoming an issue. So I think that the best option is to be, if you're going to be the provider and they've already contacted you ahead of time, or you're already providing traditional services, be part of the spending plan meeting, be part of those budget meetings, be invited, be sure that you are part of that conversation, because Like you said, what can happen is that they may be thinking something else as far as service, more individualized, more hours or something different. And you're assuming, or we're going based on what's in the budget. And so this is the time where we can talk to regional centers as providers and say, hey, you know, what they're asking for on the person-centered plan or what their goal is doesn't really correlate with what the services we're doing right now and the rate that we're providing right now. So since they want more one-on-one, which is what's happening more often now with providers, we want more individualized, more unique services from you guys. And so what is that going to look like? What is that going to cost? Is it going to be different? So be part of the budget conversations and then be part of the spending plan conversations so that we're not, the family isn't short on those fundings, because that will happen and has happened. And then services are not able to be accessed in the future, you know. So I think that that's important to be part of the conversation. I think that would eliminate a lot of that. Again, those contracts, those agreements right off the bat are super important to be detailed, so there's no misunderstanding.
Yes, Rosie, that involvement is so important. And as I'm looking in the chat at Andrea's comments, you know, she's just saying that really they're just being brought in at the last minute or not invited into the process. And so that's critical, most definitely.
Yeah, we've had 3 individuals that are now that are in our traditional services that we're finding out by getting paperwork from an FMS, and the families aren't quite sure what's going on either. And like, you need to sign this right now so they can start April 1st, and we don't have rates. We don't know what they're talking about. Like, I'm assuming it's traditional services. We had one person decide they didn't want to do that, but I was unclear of whether they are going back to traditional services. So yes, being involved is very important, but if you don't have the opportunity to do that, we can't. And the interruption of services, you know, I don't want to do that either. Folks have been with us for a long period of time, so it's not been and yeah, there's something that needs to be fixed there as far as that goes, like Eric was saying, but I don't know what that is. And I don't know if it's like an understanding on the family's part that this isn't necessarily exactly like the regional center, you know, not and maybe they assume that everyone's involved, but I feel like we've been left out and it's been very confusing.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing similar things as Andrea, because based on my experience, the families that go into SDP, just being an SDP doesn't necessarily mean that the family understands the whole process. Oftentimes I have to kind of retrain them on the process. And some families would think that because they said something to the regional center or to me, they just assume that all the agencies involved would know that information, although like we're all separate entities. So there has to be some kind of communication, you know, so that everyone is on the same page. But I think that's missing right now. And I totally agree that service providers are not given enough opportunities to be involved. So maybe like the regional centers and IFs could more like explicitly encourage the families to invite service providers to key meetings.
Yes, I agree, Sue. I think I don't want to oversimplify, but I think that's a pretty easy fix. I mean, something that we can definitely communicate to our service coordinators and to families. And Tracy and Johnny are here on the meeting as well, and they each have a participant choice specialist assigned to them right now. I hope to have one in the near future, but those individuals might be able to assist too, and just getting that message across. Tracy, Johnny, do you want to add anything about that?
Hi, everybody. Johnny John here, one of the associate directors. Yeah, absolutely. I think that communication piece is huge. And we can certainly encourage that, as well as the IFs that are working with the clients. The hope is that they can also encourage clients and families to start those communications early on. Because like, hear what Eric is saying, you know, if a client, and I'm just thinking, and back to what Sue's saying, if a client transitions into SDP and doesn't quite understand how everything works, that's a little concerning, because midway through, they're going to try to continue with the same day program that they've been with for many years. And then now the rates can look different. The services can look different. And just to try to throw everything on the fly and try to accommodate that, it may not be the best approach. And so having those conversations early on to establish what does that look like? Because under SDP, really a vendor provider who is now providing service as just a provider can really work with that individual and negotiate what that service look like. But the other challenge that I can see too is that for many years, you know, our vendor providers been providing day programs like the way how they have, and to kind of mold that or change that to something different to work with SDP, that could be a challenge too. So I think these conversations, communication need to happen early on. Otherwise, midway through it, now it's like, wait a minute, what's going on? The participants wonder why service is different now, why the support is not there. Not by anybody's fault, just that it's important to have those conversations early on, so that way we don't get to midway point and then trying to figure it out, what do we do now? Because rates don't necessarily have to be the same as what the providers and vendors have with the regional center. It can be different. And so I think we, as much as possible, we can encourage clients and IF to engage in those conversations. I know the word budget was thrown out there a couple of times. I just want a quick clarification on that. So when it comes to the budget, determining what that looks like, that typically involves definitely the regional center, right? It involves the regional center. We got to look at the unmet needs, what we're currently providing, determines the budget. It is the spending plan where typically that's when they start identifying the providers that they want to use. And so I just want to make sure that it's clear that there's a distinction there. And spending plan is not the same as the budget, because those two can be different. And so as a client moves into SDP, start having that conversation through the process, I definitely would encourage those communications. So that way, when you get to the spending plan, the provider that's going to be providing the service and support, they know exactly what that is. And it's not just being handed to them at the last minute, or look, the client's been attending your day program. Now the client's in SDP. You need to sign these things. You need to go through ACBS assessment in order for us to fund through the FMS agency for these services and supports. And so, yeah, absolutely, I would agree that communication needs to happen early on, involve those folks, the providers that the client want to continue to use, just noting that they will then be providing the service as a provider and not necessarily as a vendor anymore once the client transitions over to SDP.
Can I add a suggestion on that? I think that one way to do this, and I've made the suggestion to a few regional centers, is to add that in the orientation. Next steps in the orientation should be contact your service providers. If you will be using your service provider, contact them right away to talk about moving into self-determination. I think that that should come during the orientation, because once they get out of orientation, they're sort of like, okay, what do I do now? And so if you have some sort of flow sheet where it says contact your FMS, find an FMS right away, find an IF, and then contact your service providers that you're currently using. Are you going to continue to use them? Something like that, because I think that would begin that conversation and that thought, okay, maybe I need to involve my providers, because you're right, a lot of them do not talk to the providers and they just kind of spring it on them at the last minute.
Maybe another thing to add on the family training is to encourage families to share their person-centered plan with all the service providers involved. So it's the plan that IFs or person-centered planners write about the client. And that plan, we call it the PCP, it could have the IPP goals, like the traditional service goals, but also has some additional goals for the family. What's important to them, really emphasizing the client's strengths and interests. So that PCP plan is very comprehensive. And when I write that, I tell the families to share that with the service providers, but not all families follow through. So if the vendors are aware that such document exists, don't be shy to ask for the document from the family. But I think the family can have some training on how to share the PCP with everyone involved.
Thank you. So our next question, I think we've touched on it just briefly, but how does the IF help with developing the contract between the provider and the participant? And what do these contracts look like? And are there any terms that the IF recommends a provider prepare for in advance?
Well, we definitely don't do any of that.
Okay.
So we don't, we're not involved in the contract. There's legality behind that. And so as a business owner, a vendor is a business owner, that's their responsibility to develop that contract and to be specific on it, what they're going to be doing. Like I said, the services that you're going to be providing, the fees, the payment process, all that should be part of that new contract, because again, you're not now contracted with the regional center, you're contracted with the participant and their family and the FMS. So as independent facilitators, we don't want to get into the legal jargon of it, because we're not responsible for that, nor do we want to be. So I think, again, we don't develop that, we just kind of facilitate and try to make sure that it is completed, that you guys are in agreement and all the fees are accounted for in the spending plan. Sue?
Yeah, I would totally agree with what Rosie said. I was looking at the chat about so the question was, when adult client doesn't have family or isn't conserved, how does an IF interact directly with the client to initiate the process and keep service provider or vendor in the loop? Since I work with non-English speaking families, I do have to step in a lot and do more direct engagement with the vendors. So like what you would normally do to start any process, right? You get their contact info, you do some research, and you introduce yourself. And oftentimes community vendors, like who are not in the traditional regional center system, but like local gym or places like that, like they don't have any idea about the SDP. So sometimes I'll have to write them a long email, just explaining what this program is, providing like some websites where they can look up the information, and I tell them briefly about the process. So that way the vendor has more understanding of the SDP. And after that, we establish the relationship first, and then I just tell them like updates, like the family is still working with the regional center, like we'll take some time to develop the budget. And we'll like keep the vendors involved in developing goals, making sure we're on the same page with the rates and everything and the length of the contract. So yeah, I do more direct engagement like that, but it's not necessarily like required for IFs, because the family could just take on the responsibility. And
Yeah, and again, it's just facilitating, but we don't read the contract, and we do read the contract if it's provided for us, but we don't give feedback on like, change this or change that, because that's the responsibility of the vendor. One of the suggestions I make to regional centers is to create maybe a flyer or something where you describe what self-determination is, so that it's specific to vendors and not just vendors that are currently regional center vendors, but also to local businesses. And what is self-determination? And this is a recommendation I make to all regional centers, because I think it's lacking. And I think that we as independent facilitators have to explain what self-determination is to all local businesses and sometimes even to vendors. And so if we had something simple during orientation where you can give that flyer, the participant and their family can actually start providing that flyer ahead of time, kind of giving a heads up to those individuals that they want to hire or be part of their self-determination team. So it's just a quick little flyer with some details on what self-determination is and how could it benefit them as providers to be involved as well.
Rachel, are you here? I think I saw your name pop up and then.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. I just wanted to ask, is there anything you'd like to add? I know you were having some connection issues. Oh, darn. It seems like she might still be. Okay. So this is just a question for
Hear me,
for
everyone?
Oh, is that you, Rachel?
Oh, that is me. I'm
Okay.
really struggling with my audio today, but I'm here. Can I add something real quick for providers just about contracts?
Please.
Okay, so just, what we've done as an agency for our direct services is we use DDS as an example of what a contract can look like between an individual and a provider. We use that as our template and then customized it. So we added in, as our own agency, we are mandated reporters. We want people to know that. We have, we want people to know the grievance policy. We want people to know what, confidentiality looks like. So I'd really suggest that a proactive step you can take as a provider is just create a contract now that you feel comfortable using. And then when people approach you, right, it can be customized based on services, but maybe you've got your rates set for SDP, but then your hours are going to adjust for each person. But if you go onto DDS's website on their self-determination page, they do have that template for a contract. That might be really helpful.
Thanks, Rachel. Is there, from any of our independent facilitators today, what advice would you give providers about self-determination?
I'll start with, get to know the self-determination program. There is lots of PowerPoints, there's a lot of information. where you can really understand more about it and how it works and what the goal is. There is the Disability Voices United. They have on their website.org, they have plenty of videos where you can learn a little bit more about it. So just really get familiar with self-determination in general so that you can see how your services can fit the program. That would be the first one that I would start with.
Disability Voices United is an incredible organization. They have such great resources for individuals, families, possible providers, and SDP. They have their SDP Connect meeting every Wednesday from 4:30 to 6. It's a great way to just hear what's happening in SDP, and many of the challenges that you guys have mentioned that you're seeing as providers are discussed at those Wednesday gatherings. So it might just be a good thing to sit in on. But I would say my the best advice that I can give all of you is just self-determination is really different from the traditional service system, right? So it's kind of cliche to say think outside the box, but really think outside the box, right? You're not going to be hemmed in by a service design, right? You can support people in new and different ways based on the goals people have and what you can offer. So like Rosie said, just learn as much as you can and get excited about it and know that it might be messy in the beginning, but that's okay, right? SDP is still fairly new to a lot of us. So, in it together, ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, I agree to what David said, and I'm gonna add that get to know the independent facilitators of the families early on. They're the ones who can tell you the missing information, because IFs do see the family from the very beginning to like all the way. We work very closely with the families. So if you have any questions, IFs should be able to direct you to the resources that you might need or answer questions.
Another thing would be that I would suggest is get to know the FMSs. And you can already sign up as a vendor without having a client. That way you are set up with the policies and how they work, and all your paperwork is done ahead of time. So just do that ahead of time. You don't need to wait to have a client to set yourself up with the FMSs as a provider.
Yeah. And the nice thing is with the FMS, if you're already, then essentially signed up with the FMS for one individual, you can provide services to any individual in SDP through that FMS. So it's really only a one-time process and then sign a few extra things, but it's fairly easy for providers once you're in their system.
Thank you. I think we can open it up to questions for the last few minutes here. I see a couple. One is, can an IF assist the family or participant with a grievance toward a provider?
I mean, we could be, go ahead, Rachel.
Go ahead, Rosie.
No, go ahead.
We're probably going to say the same thing, possibly, right? If that's the support that an individual needs and has requested of their independent facilitator, an independent facilitator could help them navigate that process and, help, advocate alongside them for, whatever the issue is or whatever they need. But each independent facilitator can do different things. So there might be an IF out there who says, nope, that's not a skill that I have. You need to ask someone else to help you with that.
Yeah, and I would suggest that they go to the service coordinator and deal with it directly if that's one way, or just work it out in other forms with the provider, because as independent facilitators, we don't give legal advice, nor we're involved in any type of lawsuits or things like that, because we're not, attorneys in any way. And so we can, instead of helping, we can make the situation worse. So all we can do is try to support them, give them some resources. Again, we are paid through the spending plan. And so the more that we're involved, the more that they have to pay independent facilitators. And it's not something that we train independent facilitators to do. So it's not something that we necessarily encourage, that they are very involved. They can consult an attorney or something like that, but it's something that probably not all independent facilitators are going to get involved in.
Mm-hmm. Eric, do you want to speak to what you've written in the chat, or would you prefer I read it?
Sure. It's just a note. We're still finding out how to move forward, and so we're trying to help in those early stages identify and help the family understand whether they're purchasing a traditional service. So this would be like a traditional transportation service. Basically the same service they were receiving under the regional center, if that's identical or not, and if it's customized. And most of the time, like we talked about, they're thinking just that they're purchasing an identical service, but we're hoping that if we communicate that with the family early on, they'll understand that as they modify, we have to change the contract. So it's one way of saying, hey, this is for traditional, if you're not ready to have a more in-depth conversation about, customizing your service, that's fine, but help them understand that as they move to modifying or customizing their service, we have to change the contract so they understand that piece. And then just a heads up, because a lot of us have systems that are 100% or close to 100% signed around the regional center service. These a lot individual support even with the traditional service. They just need more support in accessing services, and especially as they go to customized services, it quickly outpaced my ability to provide all the support that they needed to set up a brand new program or service for them. So if you're working with SDP, you really want to start thinking about some of your trusted, maybe supervisory staff that have some room on their caseload. So as you start adding folks, you can assign somebody that you really trust to work with that caseload, because there's going to be things that come up that needs to be addressed, and our normal systems just didn't work well for that. So we're trying to build this on the fly. So just a couple recommendations from our experience to just try to get that process started and avoid some of the mistakes we made early on.
Thank you, Eric. Rachel says, great suggestions. I saw her little thumbs up too. Benita is here. Hi, Benita. Benita Shaw. Benita, I see that I'm glad you're here and willing to speak about your experience as a volunteer IF and as a parent.
Just say hi.
Hi.
Just kind of jumping in, so I don't have anything to say at the moment. Even though I actually do have clients, so I actually do an independent facilitator. Excuse me, I'm tongue-tied this morning. And I also do person-centered planning, so I'm just kind of here listening, and I can kind of jump in when needed.
Okay. Yeah, we've had some, kind of a series of questions that Sue and Rosie and Rachel have answered, and then our providers are chiming in with questions along the way as well. So we've had a good discussion. And, I think really landing on just some tips as a provider, to prepare, as providers prepare themselves. And also, we've learned some things from the regional center side that maybe we can just reinforce even more deeply than we are currently around, sharing the person-centered plan with providers and such. So just kind of bringing you up to speed a little bit. But we're in the question and answer stage right now.
Can I add on what Eric was saying right now on the traditional? When we're talking about communicating with the families originally about the self-determination, and if they're already part of your program and they're using what you're calling traditional, make sure that they understand what services were considered traditional, and then how that looks different from what they're asking, because I think that they may not fully understand what services you were providing, because that was a contract that you had directly with the regional center. And sometimes as parent, I am a parent as well, and I have services at regional center for my son, and I've never seen the contract with the provider, in the regional center. So I don't know what the details of that contract is. And I just know the services that end up at my home, but I don't know all those details. So it's important to share that with the family and the participant now that you're going directly to them, because again, just so that there is no misunderstanding, I would say.
Yeah, and ask the family for a copy of the person-centered plan, the PCP, because that will give you an idea of how the family wants your services customized.
And be prepared for that, because in most cases through self-determination, we're looking for customized services. They're going to look different, more individualized. And I think that is the first step. And as a vendor, I would say, you know, I would do a mass email or a mass mail out saying, hey, if you're interested in self-determination, let's have a talk, let's communicate. I'd like to see what your vision of self-determination is with us included. And that way you're already saying, hey, I'm involved in this. I would love to be part of your self-determination process, because I think in the long run, more folks are going to jump on the self-determination. They're going to see how it benefits them, and how individualized and unique these services can be. And if you're not involved from the get-go, sharing that you are willing to customize your services and meet their needs, they're going to start going to more local businesses. And so I think just getting very involved right now, sending that mass email, mass mail out, and saying, hey, we're here, you know, let us know how we can, and that data, you know, that feedback from them, if you do some sort of survey even, that would help you start realizing what the community is going to need and what they're looking for. That would just be my suggestion.
Great, thank you so much. John, do you have anything you'd like to add for our Coffee with CSS today?
Just real quickly, folks, we are still working on the implementation of the rate study. We did get some documents from DDS yesterday that they believe that all of the batch 4 rates will be completed on April 8th. We still do not have a process identified by the department to share those rates with service providers. I would assume we would do something similar like we did with the alternative services rates, where we sent them out, you know, that way to folks. But again, we do not know what the department's grievance process is or their appeal process is yet either, as it relates to, you know, when you receive your rate and whether or not you feel like it's a appropriate implementation of the rate study for your particular service. Again, staff are working diligently to try to get these things, you know, completed, but you know, understanding that there's a lot of service providers throughout the state of California. So I think, again, on our end, we are doing this in a timely manner. We're submitting the batches as we are supposed to be, so that it would not have any additional delays that may occur. Outside of that, Olivia, Jean, or Jordan, anything else that we wanted to make sure that we shared with the service providers today? All
Nope,
right.
I think that was it.
Well, folks, as we've mentioned, this is these Coffee with Community Services meetings are recorded, and they do go up on our YouTube page. And so, Jennifer, I really appreciate that. I don't know that we've had quite as an engaged question and answer opportunity as we have had today, and we've been doing this meeting for about 1.5 years. And so I really appreciate just all the discussions and really giving the service providers an opportunity to express it from their point of view as how it's being implemented. And we certainly, you know, you got all our management staff in essence that have joined for this meeting as well. So, you know, none of this falls on deaf ears, and we really appreciate you guys doing this. Thank you so much, and we will look forward to meeting with everyone next year.
And thank you, Rosie and
Next year,
Sue and
excuse me, next
Rachel.
week. What am I
Next
saying? Not
year?
next year.
Where are you
Next-
going?
We're gonna take a whole year off, folks. No, we will meet with everyone next week, and we will certainly let you guys know when we have our new guest speakers that join us as well. I do want to note that Rachel did put her contact information into the chat. I'm sorry, the other folks that did this, if you guys would not mind dropping your names or emails in the chat real quickly. And we will make sure, because I know some people have already signed off, that we do get, you know, Benita's everyone's contact information out to folks that attend these meetings. We'll have it available for folks at the next meeting. But really, thank you so much for the coordination of this and the participation by folks.
Thanks, everybody. It was great to see you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again.
Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a nice day. Bye, guys.